At Christmas Eve, my sister brought her new boyfriend home, and my mom whispered, "Don't react." The whole table watched me like I was about to blow. He smiled. "I think we've met." My sister giggled. "Small world, huh?" I said nothing until he mentioned last Christmas. Yes, pas ongi, I say meso. I slid another wooden chair to the end of the table and heard it creak like a plank on a wharf. Outside, the ocean wind whipped across the porch, carrying salt and the resin of fresh pine stacked in the stove. Inside, cinnamon, nutmeg, and the broth of seafood chowder braided together, thick as a wool scarf. I set a tall candle in the middle of the evergreen wreath and watched the flame huddle, testing the tinsel strands. The pendulum clock on the wall kept time like an old patient hand tapping the table. 1 minute, then another. My mother tiptoed over, her hand a little unsteady. "Ellen," she whispered, her warm breath touching my ear, "tonight, don't react, no matter what your sister says." "Okay, Mom," I said, sliding my fingers over the linen, the rough weave scraping lightly against my skin. I paused because just then the knock came at the door, and Tessa's laughter spilled inside like a glass bell breaking. My sister walked in first in a red coat dusted with snow, and behind her came a tall man in a gray coat that smelled faintly of cedar and cologne. He laid a hand on Tessa's shoulder and smiled wide enough to show off a neat row of bright teeth. "Hi, everyone," Tessa said, with that familiar hint of brag. "This is Jared." "Frank," my father said, rising and putting out his hand. He's spoken slowly ever since a mild stroke, each word pushed through what feels like thin ice. "Welcome." He gripped Jared's hand, then eased back into his chair and spread a napkin over his lap. Jared turned to me, like he meant to greet the last person in the room. His eyes slid past the clock on the wall and settled on my face. "Ellen," he said in a low, smooth voice, "I think we've met." My fingers found the worn edge where the paint had rubbed off the oak. Mom stifled a breath and brushed the small of my back. A tiny reminder. I smiled because sometimes you put on the costume that's nearest at hand. "Rhode Island's small," I said, lifting the chowder off the stove. "We all share the same wind." Tessa giggled and flicked his sleeve. "See? I told you. Everyone knows everyone here. Small world." I ladled chowder into bowls, shook a bright pinch of dill over each, and listened to ceramic touch ceramic like tiny gusts of air. Chairs scraped, spoons clinked, and eyes flicked toward me, taking the measure of whether I'd rise like a storm. I didn't. I set bowls in front of Dad, then Mom, then Tessa, then Jared. When mine was full, I sat down. "This chowder smells like a whole harbor night," Jared said, lifting his bowl. He paused. "Once did a photo shoot at a place a lot like this. Last year," my spoon paused at the rim. Somewhere, a log popped in the stove. The candle in the middle wavered, its fire blinking open like an eye taking aim. "In town?" Tessa rushed, as if one more beat of silence might sharpen into a blade. "Maybe," Jared said, looking at me. His smile thinned. "Last year, was Christmas special for you all?" The table fell as quiet as a burial. Mom set her hand on her napkin and pinched the corner, her face stretching into a tired, happy shape. Dad cleared his throat, rough. I kept my eyes on the chowder. Fat tapped the surface in thin moons, drifting through one another. I laid my spoon down slowly, and the second the sound touched the air, a memory rose, round and bright as a silver coin. Last year, same cinnamon, same wind. A man called and said he ran a fundraiser for local heritage and wanted to borrow the inn's hall for a few brochure shots. His voice fit perfectly everywhere. He knew how to complement the beadboard walls, the oil lamps on the shelf, the worn stair treads. He asked to borrow a few holiday pieces to keep the spirit authentic. I hesitated because Tom's collection, Tom was my husband and he's been gone 9 years, still lived in the glass cabinet with tiny locks small as baby jacket buttons. Just the silver angel for the top of the tree, the man said, voice softening like cream. I know it's precious. I'll carry it like a bird. Mom said, help him, honey. It's Christmas. I opened the cabinet and took the angel down. It lay cold in my palm, quiet as a word that doesn't speak. Tomorrow, okay? I said. He nodded with the smile of someone certain of his own steady hands. The next day, the angel didn't come back. The man didn't either. His number was dead. The hall rental was signed with a slick, forgettable name. I still remember the R, a long tail like fishing line. I walked past the tree and looked at the bare top, tied a red bow there as a stand-in, and it looked as out of place as an apology with no address. I almost called the police, had everything lined up, but Mom said, don't make a scene at Christmas. After the holiday, then we'll think. But Christmas went by, the snow thawed, and the whole thing sank like pebbles. I looked up and the present found its chair. Eat while it's hot, I said. Chowder goes cold fast. Jarrett dipped a spoon and blew, his eyes occasionally drifting toward the low attic landing outside the dining room, toward the old wooden chest. I recognized that kind of looking, the way a man looks who's already been in someone's kitchen and knows which drawer holds the forks. The first course passed in safe talk. Tessa's job in Providence, the stocks the neighbors argued about, Dad telling the story of a seagull learning to pry off the new trash can lids. Jarrett tossed in anecdotes about fundraising, about a gala in Boston, about brochures for some outfit on the Cape. The names sounded right and wrong at once, like a song hitting the correct keys in the wrong rhythm. After the roast turkey, I poured hot cider and set out a green plate of mince pies. Tessa leaned on her elbow and swung her gaze. Jared said he worked at an inn with a grandfather clock like this. I told him, it looks just like my sister's place. Yeah, similar, Jared said, this time not looking at me but at the fire. Even the chest, that big wooden one under the attic. The last words fell like a chipped plate to the floor. Everyone heard them, and the silence flopped like a stranded fish. You know the chest? Dad asked, his voice small but steady, a church bell in fog. He didn't look at anyone, just at the silver spoon in his hand engraved with T.E.S., Tom and Ellen Shaw. I put my cup down, porcelain heat kissing the pads of my fingers. I saw the chest in my mind. Tom made it 20 years ago, from reclaimed oak off an old pier. It sits under a sloped beam where no one but us would go. I didn't dare meet Mom's eyes, not ready to see her old plea. Don't make this big. But she stayed quiet, her fingers kneading her napkin, gentle and shaky. Tessa gave a weak laugh, trying to tug the story back to harmless ground. Jarrett notices everything, Mom. He does events, art, that's all. She leaned toward him like a way to keep her balance. I stood, walked to the shelf, pulled down the old black ledger, the inn's check-in book, and set it on the table. The thick cream pages had lines of names like boats queued at a tiny harbor. I flipped to December of last year. There it was, a signature with a glossy, nobody's name, and that long-tailed R. I ran my finger to the exact spot and stopped. Jarrett leaned in. The smile was still there, but paler. My name's pretty common, he said, and his voice changed color. A lot of people sign that way. I work with partners. Sometimes they book under my name to keep it simple. Mom breathed in sharply, as if she'd heard something crack in the wall. Dad braced both hands on the table and sat up straighter. Tessa blurted, Don't make this into, she hunted for the safest word, a scene. I lifted my cup, not because I was thirsty, but because I needed a prop. Let me tell a story, I said, looking through the flames. This house has old things people call pretty trash. They remember, every scratch is a sentence. Tom used to say, keep them not for what they're worth, but because they're the way we tell our story. I kept it short. I told about the first time Tom nailed that chest together, glue smell, sweat, sea air, about the day his cough came and took him and left me with an 1890 wooden house neighbors called an oh what a bother. I told about the Christmas Eve I took the silver angel from the cabinet and set it in a stranger's hand because I believed right lived in him. And the morning after, when the sky was still blue but somehow a little lower by half a hand, people told me don't make a scene at Christmas, I said, staring into the cup. I didn't. I went quiet like a rusted nail. Jared smiled again, an effort as thin as a greeting card. Ellen, I'm very sorry that happened. I'm sure there's some confusion. If someone used my name, The back door eased open and the wind slipped into the kitchen. I'm late with the cookies, Hank said, his voice like a heavy blanket. He stood in his knit cap, coat dusted with snow. Linda baked too many and sent me over. Merry Christmas. Hi, Hank, I said, as if calling a skiff into harbor. Will you eat with us? I watched Mom nod, like a rope let go of a cleat. Wouldn't want to impose, Hank grinned, stepping in, but the chowder smell had more pull than the draft. He stripped his gloves, said hello around the table. Jared stood to shake his hand, his color returning a shade. In this town, Hank is both police chief and winter messenger. He eats cookies like he does his work, chewing slow, swallowing sure. I poured him cocoa and asked him into the little back kitchen, the narrow one with the round window that looks onto the lot where seagulls sometimes stand like old bald men. I've got this, I said, setting 3 things on the small wooden table. A printout of an antique site listing. A photo Marla, the woman who runs the antique shop up the street, had just texted me tonight, and the open ledger page. Marla saw a silver angel like mine posted for sale. The seller used the handle North Shore frame. The photo is a man holding a wooden frame out front of a shop. Marla says she caught it by accident 2 weeks ago, and here's the signature from last year. Hank studied them a long time, like a man eyeing whether a crooked board will hold up a chair leg. He ran his fingers along the paper and asked a handful of very small questions, the kind that trip you if you answer in a hurry. What time last Christmas Eve? Which light was on? Who has the cabinet key? He jotted with a stub pencil. It rolled to the edge, and I handed it back. Thanks, he said. I'll keep an eye, but tonight we eat. He blinked, the quiet kind of blink that agrees sometimes. The best thing is to keep the kitchen warm and set a lamp near the dark corner without tearing down the whole roof. When we came back, Jared was telling a story about a Boston gala, his hands and voice moving together. Hank sat and listened the way an old cat listens to rain. The talk swung through wine, cars, trips. I noticed Jared skipped the durable details, dates, names, street numbers. I also noticed the thin scar along his right index finger, the little C. Marla texted again. Gone. Listing just pulled. Below it, a screenshot of comments from before the pull. Someone had asked about the numbers etched on the angel's base. I leaned toward Hank and told him quietly. He frowned just a crease. The antiques community, he said, once they catch the scent, they don't let go. He sipped cocoa. They remember the marks on silver the way we remember the road to the beach. I glanced at Jared. He raised his cup and said something very smooth. Ellen, I could help your inn with a few connections. Next year we could do a news shoot, raise funds for the town. Tessa lit up. Mom shrank a little in her chair. Sure, I said, a smile thin as the window pane. But tonight we eat. For dessert, while the mince pies were still warm and the whipped cream soft as clouds, Mom's phone buzzed. She looked down, flustered, and passed it to me. Marla, I said. She sent it to the group. The Shoreline Antiques and Finds group, the local antique community, was blowing up like a squall. Someone reposted the Angel listing with an old photo from a 1928 collection. Another zoomed in on the base engraving, C 1890/SH. I exhaled and felt my chest squeeze. SH is Shaw Harbor, the old name of the inn, carved by Tom's grandfather. The thread unspooled like rope. Someone said they'd bought a frame from North Shore Frame at the Warwick Flea, next table over from a seller named Jared Cole. Another chimed in. He uses aliases and disappears after he scoops up inventory. I handed the phone to Hank. He read slowly, nodded, then lifted his eyes to Jared, the calm look of a man on a pier with waves slapping the pilings. Certain the posts are sunk deep. He didn't raise his voice. He set the phone down. I think, he said conversationally, the community out there is talking about someone, not polite to say everything at the table. I'm going to step on the porch and make a couple calls. Won't be long. He stood, slipped on his coat, and smiled at my mom. Linda's cookies are sweeter than our town bylaws. He stepped out. Wind snuck a layer across the room and the candle bent. Tessa's mouth trembled. What are you doing? She asked me, the old question like an old coat thrown back over my shoulders. I'm just setting a light near the truth, I said. That's all. Jared set his cup down. The smile turned off and his face went dim. I feel insulted, he said. Ellen, to be honest, I do honest work. I care about Tessa. I came here to be part of your family. Yes. My family doesn't need someone who knows the way into the storage, I said, still calm. My family needs someone who knows how to knock. Hank came back in, brushing snow from his shoulder. The antiques folks are noisy, he said to the table, as if reporting the weather. They just posted a watch list, a warning list of a roving seller who uses aliases, with photos, a note about a scar on the index finger, and a pretty rare 1970s Hamilton wristwatch. They're sending it to the shops around. Folks are joking it's the Angel Blacklist. He looked at Jared. Your name's on it, along with several handles. Jared opened his mouth, closed it, pressed his lips. Tessa went white. Mom reached for her arm and pulled back. Dad tapped his spoon against the bowl, just once, like a period. Just rumors, Jared said, trying to drag sweetness back into his voice. Those people, Hank said gently, they have a scary memory for silver and a habit of keeping receipts. I'm not arguing at a dinner table. I'll only say this. Stay, finish your meal, wash dishes with the rest of us, and come by the station in the morning so we can talk. Or leave, and you'll find it hard going anywhere within 50 miles where there's an antique shop. Tessa burst into a jagged cry. Jared, she said, I didn't know. I thought. She didn't finish. He looked at her like a deflating life ring. He stood and arranged his face. I think I need some air, he said. Feels heavy in here. Go, Hank said, but leave a phone number, address, and a specific time for tomorrow. I don't want to make Christmas into a work day. He set a sticky note on the table, the pencil lying flat like a little bridge. Jared picked up the pencil and wrote quickly, leaving a number. I watched the R trail off. He put on his coat and paused, his eyes stopping on the tree with its naked top. The paper-thin smile came back, like an old card from a drawer. Merry Christmas, he said, and went onto the porch. The door shut. The wind muted. In the kitchen, I flipped on the kettle. The water murmured first, then hurried. Hank sat back down, his gloves placed neatly on his knees. Tessa dabbed at her eyes, her shoulders still catching. Mom looked at me, and something in her gaze was new, like she'd just noticed I'm half a head taller. I am sorry, she said, the words moving up her throat slowly with a scrape. For last year, for tonight, for the years I told you don't react because I was afraid of breaking the peace. I thought I was keeping things calm. Turns out, I was pulling a blanket over a stain. I said nothing for a moment and rolled my chair closer, set my hand on hers. Her skin was thin and cool. "Mom," I said, "you wanted us to have a nice meal, but from now on, we eat best when there's nothing hidden on the table." Tessa lifted her head. Her eyes touched mine, withdrew, then came back like a child testing water with a toe. "I'm ashamed," she said, hoarse. "I hate that feeling you're always right. But I hate more that I see I stood on the wrong side." She looked around for something solid to hold on to. "Let me do the dishes. Tomorrow I'll come early and help you polish every piece of silver in the cabinet. All of it. Even the spoons with TES. "Polishing in a hurry, Scratches," I said, my mouth unspooling into a small smile. "Tomorrow. Slow. Does. The night loosened its shoulders. Hank stayed a while, ate the last of Linda's cookies, and told a story about his grandfather's sled getting stuck in a sand drift and the old man simply reading the paper until the tide turned. When he stood, he said, "Tomorrow I'll make a couple of calls." No need for handcuffs to jail a name. Sometimes getting a whole town to open its eyes works better. I walked him to the door. The wind bit my wrist, and the stars looked like nails driven into the black roof of sky. On the steps, the prints of Jarrett's shoes sank toward the lot, then veered toward the narrow road out to the highway. Christmas morning broke like half-peeled orange. Coffee smell ran the length of the kitchen. I heard Tessa on the porch. "Do I use toothpaste or powder on this?" "Powder," I called back. "Light hand." She gave a small laugh. For the first time since last night. Mom stood at the counter cutting fruit for brunch, now and then glancing out the window, as if rehearsing a sentence in her head. The phone buzzed. Marla. "Hot tip, the watch list spread across the state group. A shop in Warwick, where he hangs out, blocked him. Someone messaged they saw an angel like yours in a consignment storage." In the thread, a long comment from a woman in Narragansett. "He took my etched zinc frame." Another, "Look at his index finger scar. That's him." Someone attached a blurry photo with the caption, "2 weeks ago, behind the flea market." The wind inside me shifted. Around noon, a small delivery truck stopped out front. A young man in a uniform carried a cardboard box, quiet as a shadow. "For Miss Ellen Shaw," he read. "No sender listed." I set the box on the table and cut the tape. The brown wrap fell back, and the smells of old silver and linseed oil rose like a long sigh. Inside lay the silver angel. I held still for a few seconds, like a woman taking a missing hand in her own. The angel was cold with the good kind of cold. There was that scratch under one wing. I knew it from before. Tom had once fussed. Someone hung it too hard. I turned the base over, faded but readable, C1890/SH. Beside it, a small note, unsigned. "I didn't mean to keep it. I just moved things along. I'm sorry." The handwriting slanted, hurried, like remorse caught in a gust. No police talk, no return address, just a thing returned, a comma put in the right place. Tessa touched it and snatched her hand back, like she might drop a handful of years. "It's beautiful," she whispered, eyes wet. Mom stood behind me and set her palm on my shoulder. "Hang it back," she said. Her voice was steadier than it had been the night before, as if someone had tuned an instrument. I carried the angel to the tree, stepped onto a chair, and threaded a silver string through the tiny loop on its head. My hands shook, but I hung it anyway, right at the top. Light slid across the wings and threw a droplet of sun onto the ceiling. We stood underneath it, quiet, like we were standing in front of a painting where each of us saw a different piece of a life. Hank came by in the afternoon with 2 black coffees and a bag of cookies. "I figured it made it home," he said, looking up and smiling. "The antiques folks did their part faster than I can do paperwork." The consignment owner got a handful of calls, looked in the back, and there it was. A man dropped it off last night, no name. The shop wanted no trouble and sent it back right away. Sometimes public shame gets the job done where cuffs don't. Dad nodded, his eyes brighter. Truth, he said slowly, is a candle. Try to cover it, and you get wax on your hands. He set his spoon down. The metal clicked the china, clean as a period. We had a late brunch with neighbors dribbling in and out. Mom stood up, her hands still a touch shaky, but her voice firm. She smiled and apologized to me, right there in front of everyone. I've told my eldest don't react more times than I can count because I was scared of losing peace, she said. Last night I saw what peace really is. It's agreeing to look straight at things. I owe my daughter thanks for keeping this house a home. She glanced at me, then at Tessa. And I owe you a lesson I'm 10 years late in teaching, Tess. Tessa didn't cry. She laughed, face still blotchy. I'm staying the week, she said. I'll polish the silver. I'll repaint the porch door. I'll cover the desk while you run to town. She shot a look my way. I'll learn how to knock. That evening, the two of us sat at the counter and polished each TES spoon under warm yellow light. The paste smeared our fingers in faint white tracks. She told me about parties in Providence, about people using mirrors to reflect themselves and forgetting there's a face across the table. I told her about Tom, about how living in an old house means hearing it complain when the wood contracts and answering with varnish, screws, and patience. About then Hank texted. Jarrett didn't show. But no need to chase. The watch list is on a couple of statewide Facebook pages and 2 national antique forums. He won't move anything around here for a while. A second text. Men like him sometimes leave without a sound. That's okay. Bien. 2 nights after Christmas, a slim brown envelope arrived. Inside was a consignment receipt from the Warwick store. Sender. NC, too thin for court. Just enough to become a line in a story. There was a $50 bill tucked in with no explanation. Marla said, stick it in the roof repair fund. Call it evaporation fee. I folded it and slid it into the black ledger next to last year's signature. 2 pieces of evidence side by side like strangers who'll never shake hands. 3 days later, Mom went to the market and came home with a small wooden sign. The 3 of us, 3 generations of women, hung it by the door. Shaw Harbor Inn, respect is your ticket in. Tessa took a pen and carefully added, and you have to knock. She wrote slowly, her letters a touch slanted, the pen nib shaking. When she screwed it to the wall, I listened to the bite of metal into wood, the sound a vow makes when it clings. Winter shortened and January brought rain. Jarrett didn't come back. His picture, scar, and Hamilton watch slid through the antique groups like a coattail in a rear-view mirror. The community sent each other stories. Someone lost etchings. Someone else loaned a vase and never saw it again. I didn't count how many said his name. I only knew that when I opened the glass cabinet, the silver angel glowed with restraint, the kind of light things have when they've come home to the right place. Mom retired. Don't react. She replaced it with, I'll stand beside you. When she says it, the kitchen seems an inch wider. Dad sometimes runs a thumb over the TES on a spoon and smiles just for me. Tom would be proud, he says. I don't know if Tom likes being dragged into conversations, but I know he'd nod at how I hung the angel a hair lower so it wouldn't brush the ceiling. Tessa stayed longer than planned. She learned the small things, how to hear the wood and know which step needs a screw, how to wash china without dulling the gold rim, how to tell guests. The kettle in this house whistles before it boils like a cranky old man. She learned how to keep quiet when quiet is what's called for, harder than arguing. She proposed an open house to raise a little money for local preservation, this time inviting Marla to speak, asking Hank to tell a few town stories. And for the first time, she didn't put herself in the center of the photo. On New Year's Eve, no party, just the sound of a storm out at sea, I stood before the tree, stripped of most ornaments except the silver angel on top. I touched it, the metal cool with that good chill. The house is quiet now, I whispered, not sure whether to Tom or to the wooden walls that have heard me loud and soft for decades. The pendulum clock struck 12, each chime a wave hitting rock and breaking, smaller, smaller, until only the wind's breath moved under the door. The next day, I hung a little card under the "Respect is your ticket in" sign. It said, "Thank you for knocking." Not for Jared, for everyone who has and will choose to stand outside for a second, pull a breath, and rap softly on the wood instead of pushing straight through. I watched the card sway in the draft and thought, peace isn't silence wrapped around a secret. Peace is when the truth is invited to sit at the table, pick up a spoon, and eat with us.